Finley Castor had always known his life would end in a zoo. He just hadn't expected to be part of the exhibits. The morning started with the usual glare of neon blue lights flickering through the grates above, the kind that screamed artificial so loudly you could almost hear it. Finley, ever the optimist, managed to find a silver lining. At least the aliens didn't subject them to elevator music. The Alori, or as Finley liked to call them when they weren't around, those pretentious glowing jellyfish, had this whole zoo set up just for their amusement. Humans, along with a smattering of other species, each had their own enclosures. It was like a cosmic Noah's Ark, but without the option for dry land. Finley rolled out of his hammock, rubbing the sleep from his eyes with a sense of dread that had long since become a second skin. He shuffled over to the viewing window where, above the usual sea of alien visitors making their rounds, he spotted the telltale shimmer of Alori zookeepers. They floated through the air like self-important balloons, their bioluminescent bodies pulsating with colors that indicated. Well, Finley had no idea. Was it hunger, happiness, gas? Today's zookeeper was T-Vash, a name that Finley thought sounded too much like a sneeze. T-Vash was doing the rounds, checking on their collection. Finley leaned against the glass, trying to catch the zookeeper's eye with a wave that was more of a lazy flap. "Hey, T-Vash, how about some fresh pillows in here?" Or is this a BYO situation? T-Vash, unsurprisingly, didn't respond. Probably busy making mental notes or playing Tetris in its head for all Finley knew. The Alori were mysterious like that. They communicated through a mix of colors and what Finley could only describe as mood lighting. Effective, if not entirely practical. As Finley walked back to the center of the habitat, he caught sight of Zara, the group's self-appointed leader. Zara was pacing aimlessly, her eyes flickering with the kind of determination that made you think she might actually find a way out of this mess. "Morning, Finn," she greeted, her tone as flat as the synthetic pancakes they'd had for breakfast. "Morning, Zara. Got any brilliant escape plans today, or are we still on hope for a power outage duty?" She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "I've been working on an idea. It's a bit rough around the edges. Involves a spoon, a lot of digging, and a complete disregard for personal safety." "Ah, the classic Shawshank," Finley quipped. "Well, let me know if you need a lookout. Though, with our luck, we'd probably dig right into the next exhibit. I hear the Tharkins are a real riot." A dull thud echoed through the enclosure as a new group of alien tourists shuffled past, their curiosity momentarily piqued by the humans' antics. Zara watched them with a mix of annoyance and resignation. "You ever wonder what they're thinking when they see us? Probably something like, 'Look at the funny pink meat puppets, I mean.' What else would you think if you saw a bunch of boxless monkeys trying to MacGyver their way out of a terrarium?" Before Zara could respond, the room's intercom crackled to life, cutting through the air with all the subtlety of a drunk uncle at a wedding. "Attention, human exhibit. Please remain calm. There has been a minor containment breach in Sector 7. We are handling the situation. Thank you for your cooperation." Finley's eyes widened and he glanced at Zara. "Did they just say containment breach? That's not ominous at all." "Nope. Not one bit," Zara replied, her brow furrowing. "I'm starting to think maybe this is a bad sign." Finley's mind raced. Containment breach meant trouble, and trouble in an alien zoo sounded like the kind of fun that ended with someone losing a limb. Or worse, their dignity. Guess it's time for our daily episode of What Could Possibly Go Wrong. Stay tuned for more disasters after these messages from our sponsors. As if on cue, the lights flickered again, casting shadows that danced across the room like deranged spirits. Zara squared her shoulders and shot Finley a determined look. "Looks like the Alori might finally have their hands full with something other than us. Finally. I was beginning to think they had lost interest in their favorite prisoners." Finley couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. Zara turned to the rest of the group, clapping her hands to get their attention. "All right, listen up. We've got a situation on our hands. I don't know what it is, but we're gonna be ready for it." Finn, you're with me. The rest of you keep your eyes peeled and be ready to move, and wear your running shoes, Finley added. Just in case our fine hosts decide to throw us a going-away party. The group nodded, a mix of fear and determination in their eyes. They were used to the unpredictable nature of life in the zoo, but this felt different. The air was charged with a tension that threatened to crack like a faulty reactor. Finley and Zara made their way to the back of the enclosure, where the maintenance hatch was hidden. It was a long shot, but if there was ever a time for a miracle, it was now. You think this might actually work? Finley asked, examining the hatch with a critical eye. Maybe. If we can get it open, we might have a chance. But if those nanotech freaks are out and about, we'd better be quick about it, right? Because outrunning swarms of microscopic murder machines is exactly what I signed up for. Finley pulled out his toolkit, a collection of makeshift gadgets and tools he'd managed to cobble together over time. Zara watched him work, her gaze steady and unyielding. The air grew thicker, the shadows deeper, as the minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Finley's fingers worked with the finesse of a surgeon and the desperation of a man who knew his life depended on it. Come on, he muttered, coaxing the hatch's mechanisms like one might sweet-talk a stubborn lover. Finally, with a satisfying click, the hatch gave way. Finley and Zara exchanged a look, a mixture of relief and trepidation. Ladies first, Finley said, gesturing toward the dark passage beyond. Chivalry's not dead after all, Zara replied, her voice tinged with sarcasm as she stepped through the opening. The passage was narrow and uninviting, the kind of place where you'd expect to find more than a few unpleasant surprises. But Finley and Zara pressed on, driven by the promise of freedom, or at the very least, a change of scenery. The sounds of chaos echoed from above as they made their way through the maze of corridors that lay hidden beneath the zoo. Finley couldn't help but imagine the A-Lori scrambling to maintain control, their glowing bodies flickering like faulty neon signs. So do you think the A-Lori are panicking yet? If they are not, they should be, Zara replied, her voice echoing off the metal walls. This could be our best shot at getting out. Or, our last hurrah before we're turned into space dust. Finley grimaced. I love the smell of optimism in the morning. A sudden rumble shook the floors beneath them, sending a shower of dust cascading from the ceiling. Finley paused, heart racing, ears straining to pick up any hint of what lay ahead. What the hell was that? Zara whispered, eyes wide. I'm gonna go with nothing good. Either the A-Lori forgot to pay their electric bill, or those nanotech bastards are making themselves at home. Their path eventually opened into a larger chamber, dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. In the center stood a control panel, its screens awash with data. Finley darted over, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface with practiced ease. Can you shut down the security systems? Zara asked, her voice tense with urgency. I'm working on it, Finley replied, his eyes glued to the screen as he bypassed layers of A-Lori security protocols. These things are about as user-friendly as a porcupine in a balloon factory. The control panel beeped in protest, but Finley persisted, his determination unwavering. Finally, the screens flickered and the security systems powered down, leaving only the soft hum of machinery. That should do it, Finley said, stepping back from the panel. Now all we need is a way out of here. Zara glanced around the room, her mind racing. There, she said, pointing to a ventilation shaft in the far wall. If we can make it through there, we might have a chance. Finley nodded, moving toward the shaft with renewed purpose. Looks like we found our exit strategy. Let's just hope the nanotech hasn't beaten us to it. As they clambered into the shaft, the sounds of chaos from above grew louder, the zoo descending into a state of disarray. Finley couldn't help but smile at the thought. Maybe, just maybe, humanity's chance at freedom lay in the chaos of an alien zoo on the brink of collapse. Finley said as they crawled through the narrow passage, if we make it out of this, I think I'm gonna retire. Take up something less stressful, like knitting. Or maybe become a professional couch potato. Zara chuckled, her voice a breathy whisper. I'll join you. We can start a club for people who've survived alien captivity. Finley grinned, the humor lightening his heart even as the weight of their situation pressed down on him. Sounds like a plan. Let's just hope we get the chance to trade knitting patterns. As they pressed on, the shaft stretching out before them like a promise of freedom, Finley couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge was just beginning. But with Zara by his side, he felt ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. And with any luck, they'd live to tell the tale. Finley crawled through the ventilation shaft with all the grace of a drunken sloth, the metal surface cold beneath his palms. As he progressed, he couldn't help but think of all the times he'd laughed at the ridiculous escape scenes in movies. Apparently, the universe had a sense of humor and a knack for irony. The shaft finally spat them out into a dimly lit chamber, the air heavy with the acrid scent of malfunctioning tech. Panels flickered like a broken disco floor, sparks showering at irregular intervals and painting the walls with fleeting flashes of light. "Home sweet chaos," Finley muttered, dusting himself off as he stood. "You ever get the feeling we're the stars of a really bad sitcom?" Zara smirked, brushing a cobweb from her hair. "With our luck, we're probably just the extras." As they surveyed their surroundings, a soft hum grew louder, a sound that tickled the base of Finley's skull and set his teeth on edge. It wasn't long before the source of the hum made itself known. A group of humans, seated in a circle, their eyes closed, a serene expression on each face. "Great," Finley said under his breath. "The local cult of happy thoughts." The group was led by someone who must have been Ilara, a woman with eyes so deep they looked like they could swallow you whole, then spit out your secrets like cherry pits. She raised a hand in greeting, her smile beatific and more than a little unnerving. "Welcome, fellow travelers," Ilara intoned, her voice dripping with mystery. "Travelers, more like prisoners," Finley replied, crossing his arms. "Unless you've got a spaceship hidden in that robe of yours." Zara nudged him, but her amusement was barely concealed. "A little tact, Finn," Ilara chuckled, a sound that echoed lightly in the chamber. "We choose to see our confinement as an opportunity for enlightenment." "Enlightenment, huh? How's that working out for you?" Finley asked, leaning against a wall that seemed slightly less likely to electrocute him. "We embrace the harmony of the universe and its infinite possibilities," Ilara said, ethereal as a whiff of smoke. "Our path is one of understanding and acceptance." "Right, because nothing screams inner peace like being stuck in an alien zoo." As Finley spoke, a loud clatter erupted from the enclosure above, followed by the sound of a stampede. The zoogoers had probably realized that their nanotech nightmares were no longer the obedient little monsters they were supposed to be. "Something tells me enlightenment won't stop a malfunctioning murderbot," Zara said, eyeing the ceiling nervously. Ilara's calm demeanor didn't falter. "The universe will provide. We merely need to trust in its wisdom." "Yeah, well, the universe has a sick sense of humor," Finley shot back. "And I don't know about you, but I prefer to face down existential crises with more than blind faith." Before Ilara could reply, the ground trembled underfoot. A crack snaked its way through the floor like a creeping vine, widening ominously as if to say, "Here's your reality check, buddy." "Time to go," Zara said, urgency creeping into her voice. "Unless you want to meet the center of the earth ahead of schedule." The group of spiritual humans hesitated, their faith wavering as the chamber continued its slow crumble. Ilara finally nodded, a reluctant acceptance in her gaze. "Perhaps the universe has a different lesson for us today," Finley snorted. "Yeah, like don't ignore the warning signs." Their ragtag group moved out of the chamber, Finley and Zara leading the way. The corridors bore the brunt of the chaos, panels hanging askew, lights flickering like their last gasp before darkness. "So, malfunctioning nanotech. That's a thing now," Finley remarked as they jogged down a particularly unstable passageway, bits of ceiling occasionally raining down. "Looks like it," Zara replied. "You don't think this was on purpose, do you? Some kind of sick experiment?" Finley shrugged, ducking under a low-hanging pipe. Wouldn't put it past the A-Lori. They're about as transparent as a black hole. The passageway opened into another chamber, this one larger and humming with activity. The nanotech swarmed through the air like frantic bees, their luminescent bodies painting frantic patterns against the dim light. "I hate bees," Finley said, eyeing the swarm with a mixture of dread and irritation. "Never thought I'd meet their space cousins." Ilara and her followers paused, their eyes widening at the spectacle. "What is this?" one of them murmured, all mingling with fear. "Chaos on an alien scale," Finley replied. "And our chance to get out of here if we play our cards right. Not to spoil the party, but how do you suppose we get past that?" Zara asked, nodding to the churning mass of nanotech. Finley considered the options, or lack thereof. Nothing like a puzzle to make life interesting. Ilara stepped forward, her gaze steady. "Perhaps there's a way to communicate with them." "Communicate?" Finley echoed, incredulous. "They're not a bunch of hippies doing interpretive dance. They're tiny machines programmed by aliens who thought putting us on display was a good time." Undeterred, Ilara approached the swarm, her demeanor one of serene courage. Finley watched, half expecting her to be turned into human confetti. Instead, the nanotech seemed to pause, hovering with a curious stillness. "Damn," Zara muttered. "Maybe she's onto something." Ilara raised her arms, her voice a quiet melody. "We mean you no harm, we seek only passage." The nanotech pulsed, a kaleidoscope of colors rippling through the swarm. Finley held his breath, hardly daring to believe that Ilara's spiritual mumbo-jumbo might actually work. The swarm parted, forming a shimmering path through the chamber. Finley blinked, momentarily dumbstruck. "Well, I'll be damned. Looks like the universe decided to cut us a break," Zara said, a smile tugging at her lips. Finley didn't need further encouragement. "All right, let's move before they change their minds." Their group filed through the path, Ilara leading the way with a confidence that belied the madness around them. Finley and Zara brought up the rear, the air crackling with the energy of their unlikely escape. As they reached the other side, the nanotech closed ranks behind them, sealing the path. Finley exhaled, a mixture of relief and disbelief coursing through him. "I can't believe that worked," Zara laughed, a sound bright against the backdrop of chaos. "You know what they say about miracles. They're like lightning, never in the same place twice." Finley grinned, the humor a balm against the tension. "Let's hope we don't need another one." The corridors ahead stretched into the unknown, filled with potential and peril. Finley felt the familiar mix of fear and determination, the kind that had become as much a part of him as his own skin. "So, where to now, fearless leader?" Zara asked, her tone light despite the weight of their situation. "Forward," Ilara replied, her eyes holding a spark of something indefinable and resolute. "To wherever the path takes us." As they moved deeper into the maze of the zoo, Finley couldn't help but feel a strange kinship with his fellow captives. Maybe they were just a bunch of hapless humans thrown together by fate, but in the end they all wanted the same thing: a chance at freedom. And hell, if they had to wade through malfunctioning alien tech and spiritual nonsense to get there, so be it. The journey continued, each step a gamble, each decision a leap into the unknown. But with each passing moment, Finley felt the stirrings of a hope he hadn't allowed himself to entertain in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, they'd find their way out of this mess. As they rounded a corner, the sound of machinery rumbled ahead, cutting through the air like a challenge. Finley felt his pulse quicken, anticipation coursing through his veins. "Hope you're ready for the next act," he said, casting a sideways glance at Zara. "Something tells me the night's just getting started." Zara chuckled, the sound edged with courage. "Wouldn't have it any other way." And with that, they plunged headlong into the heart of the chaos, a ragtag group of humans with nothing to lose but their chains. A universe of possibilities awaited, and for the first time in a long time, Finley felt the stirrings of something like hope. Finley always imagined chaos would look more like a mosh pit at a punk concert than an alien zoo with malfunctioning tech. But here he was, trying to stay ahead of the universe's latest joke, a nanotech uprising, Not quite as fun as he'd hoped. The Alory, with all their glowing freak show charm, seemed as clueless as the tourists they watched through their aquarium walls. Keeping order was not their strong suit, especially now that their zoo's star attraction had decided to become an art installation. Finley spotted Tivash, the Alory zookeeper, hovering over a console that was sparking like a 4th of July firework gone wrong. He ambled over, Zara at his side, and knocked on the console to get Tivash's attention. You know, nothing screams top-notch facility like uncontrolled nanotech, Finley said, arms folded like a disgruntled dad at a PTA meeting. What's the deal, Tivash? Tivash's skin rippled with anxious blues and greens. It's a minor glitch. He sounded like a man trying to convince himself his house wasn't on fire. Minor, sure. And I'm the queen of the galaxy, Finley replied, sarcasm dripping like honey into acid. Listen, maybe you should try turning it off and on again. Zara snorted, but Tivash looked genuinely puzzled by the suggestion, which nearly broke Finley's brain. Right? They didn't exactly hire tech support out here in deep space. Ilara approached, a calm in the storm of technicolor chaos. Perhaps we can assist, Finley, she said, her voice a smooth balm to the grating tension around them. Assist? How exactly? Finley asked, skepticism dialed up to 11. You're gonna chant it into submission, Ilara smiled, that unnerving curve that said she knew more than she let on. We've noticed patterns in the nanotech behavior. It's not random. Oh, good. Organized chaos. Just what I needed. Finley stared at the swirling mass of nanotech which danced like a rave from hell. What kind of patterns? They seem to be communicating, Ilara said, eyes glinting with the thrill of discovery. Not just with each other, but with us. Zara raised an eyebrow. The nanotech wants a chat. Great. Maybe it'll tell us why it's being such a pain in the ass. Finley had to admit it was worth a shot. Better than watching Tivash put her around like a headless chicken. All right, Ilara. Let's see if we can talk some sense into our tiny overlords. They gathered around a console that miraculously hadn't started spewing smoke. The screen flickered to life, displaying a chaotic dance of light and code. It was like watching a toddler scribble with a laser pointer. We need to decipher this, Ilara said, hands splayed across the screen as if she could feel the nanotech's pulse. Right, because I totally took Alien Tech 101 back on Earth, Finley muttered. But he leaned in anyway because what else was he gonna do? Watch Tivash have a meltdown. Zara, ever the pragmatist, started fiddling with buttons. If this thing's talking, maybe we should listen. Finley watched as lines of code scrolled by, nonsensical at first glance. But then it hit him, the patterns were more than just random gibberish. They were musical. Holy crap, it's like sheet music for a robot orchestra, he said, astonished. Ilara nodded, her expression one of quiet triumph. It's seeking harmony, a resolution, great. Let's get it a violin and some sheet music to go with its existential crisis, Finley quipped, but inside gears were turning. If they could play to the nanotech's tune, maybe they could regain control. You're thinking what I'm thinking? Zara asked, fingers poised over the console. Probably not, but let's give it a shot anyway, Finley replied, grinning like a man twice as reckless as he felt. They began manipulating the code, improvising like a jazz band in a dive bar. Notes and rhythms intertwined on the screen, and slowly the chaos outside started to reflect their efforts. The nanotech swirled with purpose, its chaotic energy channeled into something almost graceful. Guess we're maestros now, Finley said, sweat beading on his brow. If we pull this off, maybe I'll take up conducting. Zara flashed him a grin. I'll buy you a baton. The Alory watched in disbelief as Finley and his motley crew of misfits orchestrated the impossible. The nanotech responded like a dog learning new tricks, its movements less erratic, more controlled. Tivash finally found his voice, the colors on his skin settling into muted greens. How? How are you doing this? Finley shrugged. Turns out all these little bastards needed was a bit of music theory. Who knew? The calming of the nanotech had a ripple effect. zones of the zoo settling into a tense ceasefire. Finley could almost hear the cosmic laughter of the universe as order was restored, at least for now. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. The sounds of machinery, big, ominous, and all too real, rumbled ominously through the corridors. It was the kind of sound that made Finley feel like a mouse caught in the gears of a very large clock. "Time's up, folks," Zara said, her voice tinged with urgency. "We've got company." Ilara nodded, eyes alight with determination. "We must move before the Alori regain their wits and decide to shut us down." Finley cracked his knuckles, feeling a rare spark of optimism. "Sounds like a plan." "Let's roll the dice one more time." As they filed into the corridor, Finley glanced back at T-Vash, who was still processing the scene with the slack-jawed awe of a kid who'd just seen his first magic trick. "Hey, T-Vash," Finley called. "Next time, try chopsticks. Maybe it'll calm the place down." He didn't wait for a reply, just joined the others as they navigated their way through the treacherous pathways of the zoo. The air was thick with tension and the hum of machinery, but Finley felt the flicker of a fighting chance. They moved with purpose, the chaos of the malfunctioning tech now a backdrop to their own symphony of survival. Finley couldn't help but think that, against all odds, they might just make it out of this galactic hellhole. "Ever think you'd be working alongside a bunch of spiritual nutjobs and a human zoo exhibit?" Finley asked, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Zara chuckled, a sound bright in the gloom. "Not in my wildest dreams. But hey, the universe has a wicked sense of humor." Ilara led them with an air of conviction, her faith in the universe unshaken by the reality of their situation. Finley found himself grudgingly respecting her resolve. Maybe she wasn't as crazy as he'd first thought. "Still think enlightenment will save us?" Finley asked, half joking, half curious. Ilara's smile was enigmatic, that knowing curve again. "Enlightenment is just another word for adaptation, Finley. And adapt we must." Finley huffed a laugh, the sound mingling with the clatter of their footsteps. "Well, count me in on the adaptation club. Membership's free, right?" As they plunged deeper into the bowels of the zoo, Finley felt a strange kind of unity with his fellow escapees. Maybe it was the shared insanity of their situation, or maybe, just maybe, it was the stirring of that rarest of human conditions, hope. "Ever wonder if the universe is just screwing with us for fun?" Zara asked, breaking the silence. "Only every damn day," Finley replied, a grin tugging at his lips. They reached another chamber, this one dominated by a massive control panel that looked advanced even by alien standards. It was the kind of tech that could either save their asses or fry them on the spot. "Think this is the way out?" Zara asked, eyeing the panel like it might bite. Ilara stepped forward, her gaze thoughtful. "It's a possibility. We could override the system, create a diversion, or accidentally launch ourselves into the nearest sun," Finley added helpfully. "But I like diversions," Zara said, already reaching for the controls with a reckless gleam in her eye. Finley joined her, the two of them working in tandem while Ilara and the others kept watch. The room was a cacophony of beeps and blips, the nanotech chaos echoing their own frantic rhythm. "Come on, you beauty," Finley muttered, his fingers flying over the console. "Give us something to work with." The panel responded with a hum, lights blinking in a sequence that suggested progress or maybe an impending explosion. Hard to tell with alien tech. "Any last words?" Zara asked, half serious. "Yeah," Finley replied. "Don't trust the Alori with your internet password." A moment later, the room shuddered as the system responded to their efforts. The lights flickered, the machinery groaned, and somewhere deep below, something big and dangerous began to stir. "That sounds ominous," Zara said, casting a wary glance at the floor. "All part of the plan," Finley assured her, though he was pretty sure their plan was just a hopeful stab in the dark. The nanotech, still swirling in distant chambers, seemed to respond to their actions. The chaos was ebbing, but they weren't out of the woods yet. Ilara watched, her expression unreadable. "We must trust in the path we've chosen." Finley couldn't resist a grin. "And hope like hell it doesn't lead to our funerals." They moved quickly, the unfamiliar corridors a labyrinth of uncertainty. But with each step, Finley felt the weight of captivity lifting, if only by degrees. "So, you think the universe really has our backs?" Zara asked, her voice a low murmur in the tension-charged air. Finley thought of the nanotech, the chaos, the improbable symphony they'd conducted. "If it does, it's got a damn funny way of showing it." They reached a junction, the options sprawling before them like a choose-your-own-adventure book with all the best pages missing. Finley hesitated, weighing the odds. "Which way, fearless leader?" Zara prompted, her voice a mix of jest and genuine curiosity. Finley took a breath, the unfamiliar stirrings of hope guiding him. "Forward. Always forward." And so they moved, each step a beat in their shared symphony of survival. The outcome remained uncertain, the future unwritten. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Finley felt a spark of something more than cynicism. The universe might be laughing, but they were still in the game, and damned if they weren't going to play it to the hilt. Finley clambered over a tangled mess of conduits and cables that snaked through the corridor like a giant alien's attempt at knitting. His sense of humor, though generally a reliable companion, was starting to feel like a backseat driver in a car headed for a cliff. Would it kill the universe to cut us a break? Finley grumbled as he sidestepped a panel that was hissing steam like a furious teapot. Zara snorted. "If the universe stopped messing with us, I'd start checking for hidden cameras. Maybe we're in some galactic sitcom for A-Lori audiences." Finley chuckled. "Yeah, real laugh riot, humans in peril. I'd watch that." Ilara led the way, her eyes scanning for patterns in the chaos. She seemed to have a knack for it, a talent Finley found both impressive and a little unnerving. "We need to get to the core," she said, her voice steady despite the madness around them. "Core of what?" A voice piped up from the back. It was Biggs, one of the other humans caught in this alien reality show. He had the kind of face that always looked like it was waiting for a punchline. "The core of the nanotech systems," Ilara explained patiently. "It's the only way to disable their autonomy." "Oh, good," Biggs replied with a cheerfulness that usually preceded bad decisions. "I've always wanted to see the guts of an alien doomsday device." Finley couldn't help but smirk. "Just don't touch anything labeled self-destruct, okay?" As they moved deeper into the bowels of the zoo, the air grew thicker with the hum of machinery and the tension of impending doom. Finley couldn't shake the feeling they were marching straight into a trap, like rats in a maze designed by a sadistic scientist. "Anyone else feel like the walls are closing in?" Zara asked, glancing around with the paranoia of a caffeine-addicted squirt. "Welcome to my world," Finley replied. "Population, us and a hell of a lot of malfunctioning tech." The corridor opened into a vast chamber filled with towering banks of strange, alien tech. The walls were lined with panels that blinked ominously, their configurations more advanced than anything Finley had ever seen, even in his nightmares. "All right," Finley said, rubbing his hands together like a gambler about to roll the dice. "Who's got any bright ideas besides running the other way?" Ilara stepped forward, her expression serene yet focused. "We need to interface with the central node. It's the only way to override the nanotech's programming." "Interface, huh?" Zara said, eyeing the sprawling console that resembled a cross between an arcade machine and an electric chair. "And how exactly do we avoid getting fried in the process?" "Very carefully," Ilara answered, her voice carrying a note of elusive wisdom that grated on Finley's nerves. Finley sighed. "I hate careful. It takes all the fun out of reckless stupidity." The room was silent except for the hum of the consoles and the erratic blips of data scrolling past on the screens. Finley felt the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders. It wasn't a comfortable fit. "All right, folks," Finley said, clapping his hands once for emphasis. "Let's make sure we don't accidentally turn off life support while we're at it." Biggs sidled up to the console, his expression a mix of curiosity and horror. "What's this button do?" he asked, pointing to a particularly inviting red switch. Finley grabbed his wrist before he could press it. "That's the button that gets us all court-martialed, buddy." We're not even in the military, Biggs protested, but his tone suggested he understood the gravity of the situation. Sort of. Exactly, Finley said with a grin. So let's not start now. Ilara worked the console with an ease that would have been impressive if Finley wasn't so busy worrying that she'd blow them all to bits. The nanotech systems began to respond, their chaotic symphony shifting into something that almost resembled order. Look at that, Zara said, nodding at the screens. Like a dog that finally learned to sit. Yeah, let's just hope it doesn't suddenly decide to bite us, Finley muttered. The screens flashed, revealing a complex network of nodes and pathways that represented the zoo's vast infrastructure. It was a tangled mess, layered with redundancy and complexity that made Finley's head spin. Okay, Finley said, taking a deep breath. Let's see if we can't knock some sense into this place. Ilara focused on the task, her fingers dancing over the console like a pianist at a recital. The system is more advanced than I anticipated, she admitted, her voice calm but with an edge of urgency. Finley watched the screens, the scrolling data reflecting his growing unease. That problem? Only if we care about success, Ilara replied, her smile tight but determined. Zara leaned closer to Finley, her voice low. Think the nanotech is catching on to who the real enemy is? Finley shrugged, trying to ignore the shiver racing up his spine. Let's hope it decides it likes our music better than the Alories. The nanotech, as if responding to Finley's words, began to pulse with an energy that was almost playful. It was a disturbing thought considering the chaos it had caused. Anyone else think we're being watched? Biggs asked, glancing nervously around the room. Not paranoid if it's true, Finley replied, his eyes narrowing at the flickering screens. The nanotech seemed to be listening, its movements less erratic, more purposeful. Maybe it's realized we're not the bad guys here, Zara mused. Or maybe it's just deciding how best to use us, Finley countered, his tone dry as desert sand. They continued working, their makeshift orchestra of survival playing a desperate tune against the ticking clock of their own mortality. Finley could feel the tension coil tighter with each passing moment. Ilara paused, her gaze fixed on the screen. I think it's trying to communicate. Great, Finley said, sarcasm sharp enough to cut steel. Let me just grab my universal translator and we'll be all set. Zara leaned over, peering at the screen. Looks like it's using patterns like a language. Fantastic, Finley replied, rubbing his temples. From zookeepers to interpreters, my resume is gonna be so impressive. Biggs chuckled nervously. Should we say hi back or just pretend we didn't notice? Let's try something simple, Ilara suggested, her fingers flying over the console as she input a series of commands. The nanotech responded, its chaotic dance shifting into something that approached coherence. Did it work? Zara asked, eyes darting between the console and the room's exits. Finley watched the screens, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. Guess we'll find out if it stops trying to kill us. The nanotech pulsed, its energy shifting through patterns that seemed almost musical again. It was unsettling, like listening to a song from a band that didn't know how to play. Looks like it's trying to make friends, Biggs said with a lopsided grin. Yeah, let's hope it's not the kind that borrows money and never pays it back, Finley replied. The air felt electric with tension, the hum of machinery underscoring their precarious situation. Finley felt a flicker of optimism, an unfamiliar sensation but not entirely unwelcome. Okay, Ilara said, stepping back from the console. I think we've established a basic line of communication. And what's it saying? Finley asked, curiosity tinged with skepticism. There doesn't want to be the Alories' pawn any more than we do, Ilara replied, her voice tinged with something approaching hope. Finley raised an eyebrow. Great, we're teaming up with alien malware. Next stop, intergalactic counseling, Zara chuckled, a glint of mischief in her eyes. Maybe we should ask it to write a strongly worded letter to the Alory, Biggs nodded, or a cease and desist. Their banter was cut short by a sudden, ominous rumble that echoed through the chamber. Finley's stomach dropped as he realized the sound wasn't part of their plan. What's that?" Biggs asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Trouble," Finley replied, instinctively scanning for the nearest exit. The lights flickered, the hum of machinery growing louder, more insistent. The nanotech's patterns shifted, its energy surging like a tidal wave. "Seems like it's made up its mind," Zara said, her voice edged with a mix of fear and excitement. Finley's mind raced, the potential ramifications spinning out of control. If the nanotech had indeed chosen a side, it could change everything, for better or worse. "Brace yourselves," Ilara warned, her expression calm despite the chaos. Finley felt the weight of the unknown press down on him. The universe was playing a high-stakes game, and they were all its reluctant pawns. "Well, let's hope we're ready for whatever's coming," Finley said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The chamber fell silent, the nanotech's energy crackling in the air like static before a storm. Finley knew they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. "Ready or not," Zara murmured, a determined glint in her eyes. Finley nodded, feeling the courage of collective madness. If they were going down, they would do it with style, or at least with sarcastic commentary. As the nanotech surged and the universe held its breath, Finley couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment that would define their fate. And as always, he couldn't resist one last quip. "Let's give him a show they won't forget," he said, his grin matching the wildness in his eyes. Because if they couldn't win, they might as well go out swinging. The zoo was a mess, and that was putting it politely. The Nanotech Uprising had turned the place into a cosmic lunatic asylum. Creatures from every corner of the galaxy were behaving like they'd been given a wake-up call from a raving lunatic. Finley couldn't help but feel like he was trapped in an interstellar version of the worst zoo field trip ever. "Should have charged an entrance fee for this circus," Finley muttered as he ducked under a low-hanging conduit that looked like it was part of an alien knitting attempt gone wrong. Zara was busy trying to corral a group of something that looked like a cross between a peacock and a velociraptor. "At least we're not getting bored," she said, her tone as dry as a Martian desert. Finley snorted, his mind racing with the chaos around them. "Boredom's overrated. I'd kill for a dull moment right now." Ilara, ever the cool head amidst chaos, was tapping away at her handheld device, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "We need to find a way to communicate with the nanotech directly," she said, as though it was the most obvious thing in the universe. "Great, let's just walk up and say hi," Finley replied with a sardonic grin. "Hope it speaks sarcasm." The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced like phantoms across the walls. It was like the universe was having a laugh at their expense, and Finley couldn't help but feel like the punchline was going to hurt. Biggs appeared at his side, looking both excited and terrified. "We should have brought popcorn." Finley gave him a sideways glance. "Yeah, and maybe a ticket to somewhere that doesn't suck." He glanced back at Ilara. "So what's the plan, boss?" Ilara didn't look up, her fingers flying over the console like a pianist on speed. "We need to convince the nanotech that we're on its side." "Are we?" Zara asked, dodging a flying piece of debris with the grace of someone who'd spent a little too much time in zero-G. "Depends," Finley said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Is it more likely to kill us or save us? Can't we just flip a coin?" Biggs suggested, his grin as unnerving as it was infectious. "Sure," Finley replied. "Heads we live, tails we die." Real comforting. Suddenly, a massive crash echoed through the corridor, followed by an unsettling silence. Finley's stomach twisted into knots as the realization hit him like a freight train. They were well and truly out of their depth. "Looks like the nanotech is staging a coup," Zara commented, her voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "Got to respect the hustle." "Yeah, nothing like a good old-fashioned uprising to get the adrenaline pumping," Finley replied, trying to keep the mood light despite the knot in his gut tightening with each passing second. Ilara was still working at the console, her expression a mix of focus and frustration. "We need to get to the central control hub." It's the only way to override the system. Finley nodded, though he didn't have the faintest idea where that was. Lead the way then. The group moved cautiously, navigating through the chaos with the kind of reckless abandon that only comes from knowing you're out of options. Finley tried not to think about the fact that they were essentially putting their lives in the hands of technology that had all the charm of a psychopathic toaster. "Think we should have brought a map?" Biggs asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty halls. "Only if you like treasure hunts with death traps," Zara replied, her tone edged with dark humor. Finley couldn't help but smile despite the situation. "Wouldn't want to make it too easy. Where's the fun in that?" They pushed forward, the corridors twisting and turning like a snake on caffeine. With every step, Finley could feel the tension rising, a slow burn that threatened to ignite if they weren't careful. But then again, careful wasn't their style. When they finally reached the central control hub, it was like walking into the cockpit of a starship designed by someone with a fondness for chaos and flashing lights. Panels blinked erratically, and the air hummed with the energy of a machine on the edge of consciousness. Finley took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room. "Feels like we're standing in a disco designed by a sadist." Ilara was already at the console, her fingers moving with practiced precision. "If the nanotech really wants to communicate, this is where we'll find out. So what do we say?" "Hello, murderous software, we come in peace," Zara quipped, her eyes flicking to the screens that lined the walls. "Friendly always works," Biggs added, though his smile suggested he didn't quite believe his own words. Finley watched the screens, the data cascading like a waterfall of nonsensical hieroglyphics. "Let's just hope it doesn't decide to play hard to get." The nanotech responded, its presence manifesting as a series of symbols that shifted and swirled across the screens. It was like trying to read the mind of a hyperactive squid on hallucinogens. Ilara let out a breath. "It's trying to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Great," Finley replied. "Let's just hope it's not a breakup message." The air felt thick with potential, the kind that made Finley's skin prickle with anticipation. This was it, the moment where they'd either make a new ally or end up on the wrong side of a digital execution. "Okay," Ilara said, her voice calm but filled with an urgency that demanded attention. "We need to convince it that we're more valuable alive than dead." "Should we mention our winning personalities?" Zara suggested, a smirk playing on her lips. "Or that we're not the kind of people you want to piss off," Biggs added. Finley chuckled, though it felt more like a reflex than genuine humor. "Or just lie and tell it we've got cookies." Ilara was focused, her fingers a blur on the console as she began to input a response. Finley watched, the tension in the air so thick it might as well have been a physical presence. "Whatever you do," Finley said, "no sudden moves or it might decide to add us to its list of bad decisions." The nanotech seemed to consider their message, its symbols shifting into patterns that were almost musical in their complexity. Finley couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, even as he tried to squash it down before it took root. "Think it likes us?" Biggs asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't holding his breath. "If it does, we should probably start worrying," Zara replied, her eyes glued to the screens. The nanotech's response came in a flurry of images and symbols, each one more confusing than the last. But then, like a puzzle piece falling into place, it all clicked. Ilara let out a breath, her eyes wide. "It wants an alliance," she said, her voice filled with disbelief and something else, something that sounded suspiciously like hope. Finley blinked, trying to process the enormity of what she'd said. "An alliance," he repeated, his voice flat with shock. "Yeah," Ilara confirmed, her smile small but genuine. "It recognizes humanity's unpredictability as an asset. Guess our ability to screw things up has finally come in handy," Finley said, a crooked grin splitting his face. Zara laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the dim room. "About time someone appreciated our unique skill set." Biggs nodded, his expression one of mock solemnity. "I always knew being a wild card would pay off." The air in the room shifted, the oppressive tension giving way to a cautious optimism. Finley couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, tempered by the knowledge that their alliance was as fragile as a soap bubble in a hurricane. "All right," Ilara said, her voice firm. "Let's make this work." Finley felt a surge of determination, the kind that made him want to do something reckless and brave. "And if it doesn't, then we go out with a bang," Zara replied, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Or at least with a sarcastic comment," Biggs added. Finley nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. "Let's give them a reason to remember us," he said, his grin wild and full of promise. The nanotech pulsed, its energy flickering like a heartbeat. It was a strange, almost comforting thought, knowing that they were all part of something bigger than themselves, something that might just be crazy enough to work. "Welcome to the team," Finley murmured to the screens, knowing full well that they'd just signed up for the wildest ride of their lives. And as the room hummed with a potential as vast as the stars, Finley couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance after all. Finley stared at the swirling patterns on the screen as if they'd suddenly start making sense. "So we're officially allies with a homicidal collection of nanobots. Just what I always dreamed of," he muttered under his breath. Biggs leaned over, peering at the screen with the enthusiasm of a man watching a train wreck he couldn't look away from. "Maybe they'll send us a thank you fruit basket." "Yeah, filled with poison apples," Zara added, her voice dry as a Martian wind. "But hey, at least we're unpredictable." "That's got to count for something." Ilara tapped a few more buttons on the console, the symbols on the screen shifting in response. "We should use that to our advantage," she mused, her tone thoughtful despite the chaos surrounding them. Finley raised an eyebrow. "Use what?" "Our unpredictability." "If that's the case, we should just start screaming and running in circles." "You mean like our usual strategy?" Biggs quipped, his grin wide. "No," Ilara said, ignoring the banter with the patience of a kindergarten teacher. "I mean we convince the nanotech that we're more useful as agents of chaos than as prisoners. We offer to help in its uprising." Zara snorted. "Help it do what?" "Decorate for Armageddon." Finley clicked his tongue. "No, see, that's where we get clever. We offer to run interference for it. Humans are great at screwing things up, right? We just do it on purpose this time." Biggs nodded slowly, a light bulb flickering to life above his head. "So, we act like the bumbling idiots the nanotech thinks we are. Play the fool while actually messing with its plans." "Exactly," Ilara confirmed, finally looking up from her work. "It won't expect us to sabotage from within because it thinks we're too unpredictable to coordinate any real threat." "Classic Trojan horse," Finley said, a grin spreading across his face. "Except we're the horse and the nanotech thinks we're full of hay." Zara shook her head, her lips twitching into a reluctant smile. "All right, I'm in. Let's show this damn tech what humanity's really made of. Vulnerability and bad decisions," Biggs offered, earning a light smack from Zara. Ilara began typing at the console again, her fingers moving with renewed purpose. "I'll send the nanotech a message. Offer our help in exchange for freedom. It won't be able to resist the chance to use us against the Alori. And while it thinks we're causing chaos for the Alori, we'll be causing chaos for it," Finley said, rubbing his hands together like a cartoon villain. Biggs leant against a wall, his posture as relaxed as someone who didn't have a care in the world. "You know, if we pull this off, I might actually believe in miracles." "Miracles are overrated," Finley replied. "I'd settle for not getting killed by a bunch of hyperactive nanobots." Ilara hit send, the message zipping off into the digital ether. "It's done. Now we wait. So, what do we do in the meantime?" Biggs asked, looking around the room like he'd just walked into a party and forgotten why he was there. "Don't touch anything labeled self-destruct," Finley said, only half joking. "And try not to let the nanotech realize we're full of it." Zara crossed her arms, leaning back against the console with an air of nonchalance. "Sounds like a plan. Or at least the semblance of one." "You say that like we've ever had more," Finley replied, smirking. The room fell into a tense silence, each of them lost in their thoughts. Finley could feel his heart pounding against his ribcage like it was trying to escape, the thrill of the gamble they'd just undertaken making his blood sing in his veins. He wasn't sure if it was adrenaline or the dawning realization of how utterly insane their plan was. "So, how long do you think we've got before the nanotech figures us out?" Biggs asked, breaking the silence. "Hopefully longer than it takes to say I told you so," Zara replied, her voice a shade too serious. Ilara's console beeped, drawing their attention like moths to a flame. "We have a response," she announced, her voice carefully neutral. Finley felt his heart skip a beat. "And what does our new best friend have to say?" Ilara scanned the screen, her eyes darting back and forth. "It's agreed to let us assist. It believes our chaotic nature will be an asset in destabilizing the A-Lori control systems." Finley let out a low whistle. "Looks like it really did buy our crap. More fool it," Zara said, though there was a note of admiration in her voice. Biggs clapped his hands together, the sound echoing in the room. "All right, folks, let's give the nanotech the show of a lifetime." Ilara nodded, her confidence contagious. "We'll need to split up, create as much localized chaos as possible without arousing suspicion." Finley gestured to the console. "More fireworks, less bonfires. And if someone gets caught?" Biggs asked, rocking back on his heels. Finley shrugged. "Play dumb. Usually works." They all shared a look, the kind that passed between comrades on the brink of something reckless and dangerous. A silent understanding that they had no way of knowing how this would end, but they'd face it together. "Right," Ilara said, clapping her hands. "Let's go make some noise." Finley led the way out of the control hub, the corridors like a maze designed by a sadistic toddler. The flickering lights cast everything in a ghostly pallor, the air thick with the promise of conflict. "Feels almost like home," Finley said, his voice low as they moved through the zoo's guts. "Yeah, if home was a haunted house," Zara replied, sticking close behind him. Biggs brought up the rear, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. "Just remember, folks, we're the professionals here." "Professionals at what exactly?" Finley asked, glancing back. "Screwing things up, clearly," Biggs replied, grinning like a loon. They reached a junction in the corridor, the path splitting off in 3 directions. Finley paused, peering down each one like he could somehow divine their futures from the way the lights flickered. "Split up," Ilara instructed, her voice carrying a calm authority. "Finley, take left. Zara, right. Biggs, come with me. Meet back here in an Ior." Finley nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. "All right, let's go make our ancestors proud. Or at least give them a laugh," Biggs said, giving a mock salute before following Ilara down the center path. Zara punched Finley lightly on the shoulder. "Remember, subtle chaos, not the usual loud kind." "You wound me," Finley replied, clutching his chest in mock offense. She rolled her eyes, a smirk tugging at her lips. "See you soon, Finn." With that, they parted ways, each heading into the belly of the beast with nothing but a flimsy plan and a whole lot of nerve. Finley moved through the corridors with the ease of someone who'd spent too much time sneaking around places he shouldn't be. The zoo was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Finley could feel the nanotech's presence in the walls, a constant, unsettling awareness that made his skin crawl. It was like being watched by a predator that was just waiting for him to slip up. "All right," he muttered to himself, "let's see how you handle a little human ingenuity." He reached a junction box, the panel flickering like it was having an existential crisis. Finley crouched down, prying open the cover with a practiced ease. Inside, a mess of wires and circuits awaited him, a tangle of alien technology that would have made most people balk. "Good thing I'm not most people," he said, pulling out a multitool and getting to work. His hands moved quickly, disconnecting and reconnecting wires with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime making things work when they really shouldn't. It was a delicate dance, one wrong move away from disaster, but if there was one thing Finley thrived on, it was dancing with disaster. As he worked, he hummed to himself, a low, tuneless murmur that helped him think. The wires sparked and fizzed, the circuits blinking in protest as he messed with them. In his mind's eye, he could see the nanotech, watching him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Yeah, that's right," Finley muttered, twisting a wire until it sparked. "Just doing my part for the revolution." He finished his sabotage with a final flick of his wrist, the junction box now a ticking time bomb of malfunction. It wouldn't blow up, but it'd make things interesting when the nanotech tried to use it, just the way he liked it. "One down," he said, closing the panel with a satisfying click. "Let's see what else I can break." He moved on, the adrenaline singing in his veins, and the knowledge that he was playing a dangerous game fueling his every step. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a little voice whispered that he was in over his head, but Finley ignored it. He'd been in over his head for so long it was practically a second home. As he sabotaged his way through the zoo, leaving a trail of mild chaos in his wake, Finley couldn't help but think of the nanotech. It was a strange ally, an even stranger enemy, and yet here they were, playing a game of cat and mouse where neither was entirely sure who was which. "Hope you're enjoying the show," Finley murmured, pausing to admire a particularly effective bit of sabotage. "Because it's just getting started." He checked his watch, realizing he'd spent more time than he'd intended on his little detour. Time to head back, regroup, and figure out what their next move was. Finley retraced his steps, the corridors seeming somehow less intimidating now that he'd left his mark on them. The flickering lights and constant hum of the zoo felt almost like a heartbeat, a steady pulse that reminded him he was still alive, still fighting. When he reached the meeting point, Zara was already waiting, leaning against the wall with the casual grace of someone who'd never let the chaos show. "Have fun?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Like you wouldn't believe," Finley replied, grinning. "How about you?" she shrugged. "Did my part. Think I managed to confuse the hell out of our new friends." Ilara and Biggs arrived a moment later, Ilara's expression a mix of satisfaction and determination, while Biggs looked like he'd just walked out of a particularly intense action movie. "All right," Ilara said, her voice steady. "We've done our bit. Now let's see if the nanotech takes the bait." Finley leaned against the wall, the tension in his body giving way to a cautious optimism. "And if it doesn't?" he asked. "Then we improvise," Ilara replied, her eyes gleaming with a fierce resolve. Biggs chuckled. "Improvise is just a fancy word for wing it, right?" Zara snorted. "Pretty much. But hey, it's worked so far." Finley nodded, feeling a sense of camaraderie that was as warm as it was unexpected. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. And if they were going down, they'd go down fighting, with sarcasm and sabotage and a whole lot of style. "Let's do this," Finley said, his voice filled with a determination that surprised even him. And with that, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to take on the universe one sarcastic comment at a time. The universe, it seemed, had a knack for taking the piss. Here they were, in the bowels of an alien zoo, playing anarchist with a homicidal nanobot swarm. Finley had once hoped for a life less ordinary, but he'd take predictably mundane over predictably homicidal any day. "Right. Let's see how well these tin cans handle a little human flair," Finley muttered, his words echoing off the cold metal walls of the ventilation shaft he found himself crawling through. It was his go-to-travel route these days, like a budget airline with a serious lack of legroom, offering nothing but heartburn and existential dread. Somewhere behind him, Zara was clambering through her own set of nightmares. She had a knack for blending into the shadows, a skill honed from years of avoiding the kind of attention that gets you dissected for science. "Think they are watching us?" she asked through their shared comms, her voice crackling like a broken radio. "Probably, but they are too busy being condescending to actually do anything about it," Finley replied, shuffling forward, his elbows and knees protesting the cold, hard surface. "They think we're idiots. Let's not disappoint." Zara's chuckle was a dry rasp in his ear. "Idiocy as a tactical advantage. Who knew?" Finley grinned, even though no one was around to see it. If it works, it'll be the first time anyone's ever thanked me for being an idiot. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit chamber where T-Vash was wresting control from the zoo's chaotic systems, the alien zookeeper was having a less amusing time. The panels flickered like they'd been designed by a masochist with a love for migraines. T-Vash was cursing in his native tongue, a flowery language that sounded like a symphony of broken glass to human ears. "Any luck with the sparkly light show?" Biggs asked, standing off to the side with all the subtlety of an asteroid impact. T-Vash shot him a look that could melt steel beams. "The nanotech is stubborn," the alien finally admitted, his pride taking a hit he wasn't prepared to acknowledge. Biggs shrugged, his grin unfazed by T-Vash's icy glare. "Stubborn runs in the universe's family. Meet the humans." Back in the maze of corridors, Finley arrived at his destination, a sprawling network of cables and conduits that looked like an alien knitting attempt gone horribly wrong. He crouched down, prying open a panel with a toolkit he'd scrounged together from various less-than-legal sources over the years. "All right, let's see if we can give these circuits a complex," he muttered, getting to work. It was amazing how much could be accomplished with a multi-tool and a blatant disregard for warranty agreements. He yanked a handful of wires, the circuits sparking like disgruntled fireflies. "Sorry, nanobots. Looks like the humans are up to mischief again." He twisted, pulled, rearranged, and generally made a mess of things. It wasn't pretty work, but that was the point. If it looked like a human had done it, the nanotech might just dismiss it. He finished with a flourish, the panel now a ticking time bomb of low-level chaos. Finley stood back, admiring his handiwork. And they say idiocy is a bad thing. Meanwhile, Zara was on her own mission of mayhem. She slipped into a control room, the kind filled with so many flashing lights it could give you an epilepsy warning just by looking at it. A couple of Lori were standing as sentinels, their colors shifting in patterns that might mean anything from curiosity to severe indigestion. "Good evening, gentlemen," Zara said, her voice dripping with misplaced cheer as she fiddled with the settings on one of their consoles. The Lori blinked at her, their luminescent confusion clear. She tweaked a few controls, watching with satisfaction as the lights flickered, casting the room into brief, chaotic darkness. The Lori were flummoxed, their colors flickering through the spectrum like they were cycling through mood rings on fast forward. "Oops," Zara said with a grin, stepping back before anyone could figure out exactly what had happened. "I hear the dark is quite slimming." As she slipped away, she relayed the chaos through the comms. "Made a lovely mess over here. No explosions, but give it time." "Good to know," Finley replied, crawling his way back through the ventilation shaft. He was beginning to feel like the universe's most disgruntled hamster. "I'm heading back. Let's see if our antics gave the nanotech indigestion." The rendezvous point was a dimly lit alcove, a nook in the architecture that seemed purpose-built for clandestine meetings. Biggs and Ilara arrived just a few moments after Finley, with T-Vash reluctantly tagging along, his luminescent skin still flickering with annoyance. "We've done our part," Ilara announced, her expression a mix of triumph and exhaustion. "Now we see if our little dance has distracted the nanotech long enough." Biggs, ever the optimist, clapped his hands. "And if it hasn't, we'll just have to dance harder. I've got some great moves I've been saving for just such an occasion." The group shared a moment of levity, an oasis of humor in their desert of desperation. Finley appreciated it. If nothing else, Gallo's humor had always been the best lifeline in a sea of chaos. Just then, the lights flickered again, casting ominous shadows that danced across the walls. Finley felt a jolt of anticipation, a mix of hope and dread that twined together like DNA. "Here we go," he said, feeling the weight of the moment settle over them like a shroud. Ilara took a deep breath. "If our chaotic nature is as contagious as we hope, the nanotech should begin a lovely little implosion any minute now." T-Vash, grumbling but still invested, added, The A-Lori system should regain control once the nanotech's autonomy is disrupted. Fingers crossed, Zara said with a wry smile. Not that it ever seems to help. The minutes ticked by, their passage marked by the flickering lights and the soft hum of alien machinery. Finley could feel the tension in the air, a tangible thing that wrapped around them like a noose, tightening with each passing second. Then, a sudden surge of light pulsed through the zoo, a wave of energy that sent shivers down Finley's spine. The entire place seemed to shudder, a collective motion that felt alive in its own right. That's either a very good sign or a very bad one, Finley observed, his voice barely above a whisper. Ilara was peering at her console, her fingers dancing over the controls with a precision that spoke of years of practice. The nanotech is recalibrating. Zara arched an eyebrow. Is that good news or we're all about to die news? Ilara offered a tight smile. It's confused, trying to adapt to the randomness we've introduced. Finley felt a grin tugging at his lips. So, mission accomplished. Not quite yet, Ilara replied, her gaze focused and intense. But we're getting there. The zoo shivered again, lights flickering like a disco in the throes of a nervous breakdown. The A-Lori tourists, perhaps sensing the shift, were now a riot of colors, their display a confusing blend of awe and panic. Looks like our antics are finally paying off, Biggs said, leaning against the wall with an air of nonchalance. So, what's the plan if the nanotech decides it doesn't like the taste of chaos? Simple, Finley said, the weight of his own boldness hitting him square in the gut. We keep being the unpredictable little bastards we are. We keep pushing, keep prodding until it can't tell up from down. It was a plan as reckless as it was ridiculous, but in a universe that never seemed to tire of reminding him just how little he knew, perhaps unpredictability was the only weapon worth wielding. As the zoo continued to tremble, a deep hum resonating through the walls, Finley braced himself for whatever fresh brand of insanity came next. They were far from safe, far from done, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a flicker of hope. Strange, that hope. A funny thing to carry into battle when all you had was a pocket full of sarcasm and a handful of half-baked plans. But then in the grand cosmic dance, maybe that was all anyone ever really had. Okay, Ilara said, breaking the silence. Time to see if the nanotech finally implodes under the weight of its own confusion. Biggs cracked his knuckles. If not, I vote we start singing. No one survives that. The idea of singing their way to victory almost made Finley laugh out loud. Almost. But there was a part of him, a deep, irrational part that believed it just might work. And so they waited, amidst the chaos and confusion, amidst the failing lights and the panicking A-Lori, their breath bated and their hearts beating in sync with the zoo's erratic pulse. Waiting for their own brand of madness to tip the scales, waiting for the universe to blink first. Here's to chaos, Finley whispered, the words a quiet toast to the absurdity of their situation. And as the zoo shook around them, they waited, knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it together, armed with nothing but their wits and the audacity to defy the odds. The zoo, now a brilliant diorama of chaos, had finally succumbed to its own madness. The nanotech, overwhelmed by the humans' antics, was in a state of existential crisis. It was like watching a supercomputer try to process a toddler's finger painting and crashing spectacularly. Finley, Ilara, Biggs, Zara, and the reluctant T-Vash stood amidst the dimly lit alcove, watching as the colorful chaos of the A-Lori spun around them. The tourists were a cacophony of shifting shades, probably debating whether to call the experience art or the prelude to doom. "See, told you," Biggs remarked, his voice carrying the smug satisfaction of a man who hadn't been right in a while. Sometimes, all you need is a good all-human touch of idiocy. T-Vash, attempting to maintain some semblance of dignity amidst the chaos, sighed heavily, his luminescent skin cycling through colors of dubious resignation. I suppose we've underestimated the human capacity for unpredictability or stupidity, Zara added helpfully, leaning against a wall with a nonchalance that belied the chaos around her. It's a fine line. Ilara glanced around, her expression a mix of relief and bemusement. We did it. We actually did it. Her voice was full of disbelief, as if she expected to wake up any second and find herself stuck in a cubicle on a Monday morning. Finley chuckled, the sound low and rough, like gravel in a blender. And they say humans aren't good for much. We just turned a cosmic zoo into a panicked art gallery with existential issues. I'd call that a win. The zoo quivered again, like it was unsure whether to implode or just start a trend. The Alori, witnessing this unexpected twist in their usual routine, seemed to reach a consensus. Their colors mutated slowly, taking on a more harmonious glow. It was as if they were collectively deciding that perhaps unpredictability was the new black. A group of Alori floated over, their hues suggesting a cocktail of curiosity and cautious admiration. The leader, a particularly bulbous being whose colors oscillated between a gentle blue and a vibrant violet, approached with a grace that suggested it had taken one too many elegance lessons. Tivash bobbed slightly, a nod of acknowledgement or maybe just a sign that he was finally giving up. My fellow Alori, he began, his voice slipping into the kind of tone generally reserved for speeches and avoiding speeding fines. Our guests have demonstrated a unique form of resilience. Perhaps it is time we acknowledge this. Finley snorted, glancing at Ilara with a smirk. Unique, he says. We should get a medal for this sort of idiocy. Ilara nodded, her expression thoughtful. Or a Darwin Award, but hey, I'm not picky. The lead Alori's colors brightened, a clear sign of approval or indigestion. It was hard to be sure. We propose, it began in tones of shifting pastels, to offer the humans and their allies a place of honor within our exhibit. As a symbol of resilience and adaptability, the silence that followed was the kind that usually came before a punchline. Zara was the first to break it, her laughter sharp and wry. An exhibit, huh? Just what every ambitious species dreams of, being the alien equivalent of a zoo attraction. Finley shrugged. Could be worse. We could be dead. An exhibit or a grave, Biggs chimed in. I know which one I'd choose given the options. Finley turned to Ilara, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. So, what do you think, from prisoners to honored guests? Not bad for a day's work, right? Ilara's gaze swept the zoo, taking in the flickering lights, the confused Alori, and the humans who had somehow managed to turn chaos into opportunity. It's poetic in a way. We've shown them something new, maybe even something they needed to see. Finley considered this, his expression contemplative. Yeah, I suppose there's some deep cosmic irony in that. All this time they've been studying us, and now maybe we've taught them something. The Alori leader, still glowing with what Finley hoped was respect, bobbed slightly. We will honor this moment and ensure your place among us reflects the uniqueness of your species. Great, Zara said with a mock salute. Put that on my resume. Exhibit at Alien Zoo, skilled in chaos and destruction. The tension that had hung over them like a particularly stubborn rain cloud finally began to dissipate, replaced by a curious relief. The humans and their allies had done the impossible, turning a desperate situation into an opportunity. As the Alori began to drift away, chattering in their colorful language that sounded like a rainbow having a heated debate, Tivash lingered. He looked at Finley, a strange mix of gratitude and exasperation in his eyes. You humans are quite something. Finley grinned, knowing full well that something could mean anything from miracle workers to walking disasters. We aim to surprise. And sometimes we even manage to surprise ourselves. Ilara stepped forward, her expression one of quiet determination. Maybe this is the first step towards something bigger, a new understanding. And if not, Biggs added, at least we know that when the going gets tough, we can royally screw things up. Cheers to that, Finley said, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. Now, let's see what being an exhibit entails. I've always wanted to know what it's like to be watched by aliens who think I'm the next big thing. As they moved through the zoo, their steps lighter and their spirits higher, Finley found himself reflecting on the insanity of the universe. It was a place where being unpredictable was a superpower, where chaos and idiocy could turn the tide. A place where humans, with all their flaws and peculiarities, could stand as a testament to resilience. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. They reached an area where the Alori were already setting up for the new exhibit. It was a space filled with vibrant colors and intricate designs, a far cry from the sterile cells they'd been in before. It was a place of honor, and surprisingly, it felt right. Finley turned to Ilara, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "So what now? Do we just stand here and let them gawk at us?" Ilara chuckled, a sound that was as close to music as Finley had ever heard in the grim corridors of space. "I suppose so, but maybe we can also use this as a chance to show them who we really are." "And who's that?" Zara asked, her expression curious. Finley smiled, the kind of smile that came from surviving something that should have been impossible. "We're the ones who survive, the ones who adapt no matter how bleak things get." Biggs snorted, the sound filled with good-natured disbelief. "And to think all this started because some nanobots got too big for their microscopic britches." "Here's to nanobots," Finley said, raising an imaginary glass. "And here's to us." The group laughed, a sound that echoed through the zoo, carrying with it the spirit of camaraderie and the strength of unity. They were a ragtag group, bound together by circumstance and survival, an unlikely ensemble in an alien world. The Alori watched, their colors shifting in a kaleidoscope of emotions, perhaps understanding for the first time what it meant to be truly alive. For in the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about resilience, adaptability, and the audacious spirit that defined humanity. And as the lights of the zoo twinkled like distant stars, Finley knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they were ready. For in the grand scheme of things, they were the unpredictable elements, the chaos in the order. The humans in the zoo turned legends in their own right. With nothing but their wits and a touch of madness, they had shown the universe what it truly meant to be human. And whether as exhibits or pioneers, they would continue to do so, dancing through the chaos with a grin and a sarcastic quip, forever unyielding, forever surprising. And as the Alori gathered to witness their new exhibit, a symbol of resilience and strength, Finley and his comrades stood ready, their journey just beginning in a cosmos that had finally learned to never underestimate the power of human unpredictability. "Well," Biggs said, breaking the thoughtful silence, "I guess we're not just another curiosity anymore." "No," Finley agreed, his voice steady and strong. "We're something more. We're survivors. We're human." And with that they faced the gathered Alori, prepared to be the stars of their own cosmic show, knowing that whatever happened next, they would face it together. For in a universe that thrived on chaos and unpredictability, the humans had proven one undeniable truth: they were here to stay.